Hey everyone, welcome to the Business Minded Sports Physio podcast. My name is Brian Schwabe, board certified sports physical therapist, entrepreneur, and co-founder of the Student Physical Therapist. I worked with elite athletes for over a decade and currently serve as the director of IO Sports Therapy, working side by side with high performance coaches, NFL and NBA skills trainers, and sports agents on a daily basis. I'm also an author, sports medicine consultant, course creator, speaker, and concierge sports therapist, traveling with professional athletes and celebrities. I created this podcast to share my experience as a sports physical therapist and entrepreneur so that I could give you everything you need to know to cash in on your passions, monetize your expertise, and create your own career Super Bowl. With that in mind, welcome to the podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience working with the 2022 NFL Combine class. For those of you that don't know this, I've actually been the sports medicine lead for the last 2 years for Rep1 Sports Agency's NFL Combine class, working with IO Sports Therapy, where I work as the clinic director in collaboration with Sanford Power, which is our high performance side of things. So it's been a very unique experience and very cool experience being able to work with the NFL Combine athletes for the last 2 years. And especially this year, we had a bigger class. We were a little bit more dialed in on top of it. And we had some, really unique experiences. So I wanted to talk about this primarily for this episode because I thought it was something that would be of value for you guys who are interested in working more with sports agents, interested in working with NFL Combine classes, but also just working with football players. I mean, this is just something that you don't, do too much of unless you're in certain, places of work, maybe like an Exos or something like that, or you're working specifically with a sports agency. So, with that in mind, I want to really dive in with, a couple different topics with this experience and really explain what I actually experienced. And maybe you'll get a little bit more out of it and learn about how you can get involved with something like that in the future. So, I want to talk a little bit about what it's actually like, what we did as a group, if it's profitable. I mean, this is a business-minded sports physio podcast, so I do want to talk a little bit about that, the financials of it, and then also how to be successful with it if you do it. All right. So let's dive into, what was that experience like? Because this is something that, I hadn't done up until about a year ago, working specifically with a combine class, and it's very unique, right? A couple things come to mind right off the bat. One, it was awesome, right? I mean, being able to work with high-level athletes of this caliber is pretty awesome and amazing to start with, and just the whole experience of it, right? You're in the thick of it for 8 weeks, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, and you're working with, incredible athletes preparing for their dream going into the NFL draft, right? So, they're all excited coming in. They're stressed out. They're trying to figure out what works for them as an athlete, right? And they're trying to figure out, what this experience is like because it's a very different type of training than they're accustomed to. So, it is awesome, right? But it's also stressful, right? And, as a sports medicine professional working with these athletes, and I think I can probably speak for my colleague Matt as well with this, it's one of those things that you're working with deadlines. You're working with, high pressure because every little thing could affect someone's draft stock. And as a result of that, when you're going through this, you're like, okay, we have to do the best job possible for these individuals, and especially when they're just good people. Right. We're so lucky. They had an unbelievable class come in. Every single one of them was just, super respectful, super hardworking. And you want to work even harder for those type of people just because, they make it so much more pleasurable for you as a person, but also as, a sports medicine professional, you want to help them, right? They make you feel good. You want to help them as much as possible. So, and I'd say also you're invested, you get to know these people. So, as they're getting into the combine, you're almost nervous for them, right? You're nervous for them. You're excited for them, but you're also feeling that way as it gets closer to draft. I'll be honest with you, I had not watched an NFL draft in the past because it just didn't do a whole lot for me until last year when I worked my first combine class. And now now I'm glued to it. Now I'm looking up things and now I'm, invested in it because I know these people and it's kind of fun. So, the other thing that I want to talk about with this, what it's like is where it starts, right? So, as December rolls around and guys in college are going through different bowl games, some of them opt out and want to start the NFL Combine training process sooner. And then some of them, are going through their bowl games and then they just trickle in later. So there's a lot of leeway early on about scheduling, right? And even though you prepare as much as possible with the agency and the performance coaches and everybody else involved, skills coaches, things like that, it's a little bit of a controlled chaos in the beginning, right? You kind of have an idea when guys might be coming in, and then it could change last minute. So expect those things if you do work with combine classes in the future, and know that you gotta be flexible. Okay, so guys are rolling in December. It's early January. There's a lot of hype and excitement. We're preparing them to go through this intake process, and it's one of those things where you have to have a good schedule and be able to understand each individual guy that's coming in. Some of them is just going to be part of that daily recovery block where you're trying to keep them healthy, manage, some earlier injuries that they might have had during the season, maybe some past tendinopathies, things like that. And then there's also a few like longer term rehabs. Some of them, would have, surgeries that just required that long-term rehab leading up to the combine and their pro days. And some of them just, are very healthy, and you're just trying to make sure they stay healthy because it's a different type of training. So, there are recovery blocks that we would put in every single day. So we are having touches with those guys. We're offering recovery services, Normatec, game readies, baths, things like that. We're doing soft tissue work, all the above that you would, be able to help kind of manage these soft tissue things that oftentimes will pop up with this different type of training. And then lastly, we'll go to the field as sports medicine professionals pretty much daily, but definitely weekly, because it helps us do two things: understand what they're doing with their performance coaches, independent of our weekly and daily conversations with them. But it also lets us help the athletes get on the field, prepare their bodies for the field, and also just build a little bit of trust with them, knowing that, hey, our performance coaches and our sports medicine professionals are working together for me as an athlete, right, as a combine player. So it kind of touches upon a lot of different things. And we're very blessed to be able to work in the environment we're in because, we have a one-on-one out-of-network model. So we spend time and we can schedule these things more appropriately. We don't have to, worry about volume other than, again, the combine players. But, we're able to schedule things ahead of time and really keep it very manageable between myself and my colleague, Matt. So that's really what it's like. And that's the cool part, right? You get to experience all these unique things. You get to work in the trenches with the performance coaches, see the numbers, and, be able to, collaborate back and forth. Guys coming in that are having, longer term rehabs and might not be able to participate in some of the running drills. You're being able to really, sit down and be like, okay, the next 8 weeks, how do we get this guy to be able to do all the drills they have to do at the combine, right? Or be able to do most of the drills or whatever it may be based on their draft stock or what would be best for them based on their injury. All those things get to be taken into account. So everything you've wanted to do as a sports physical therapist, you kind of get to do, which for me is the most fun part about it. And then, next thing is what we did, right? So that's what it's like, but what did we actually do with these guys, right? So what we did is day one, they'd come in and we would take a pretty extensive intake, right? Injury history, expectations, movement screen that we created as a group with a weighted system, handheld dynamometry testing, and then, force plate testing with the performance coaches, and, other types of performance testing, bench press, things like that. Some of the guys would be getting, blood panels so they could just lock in their nutrition and have some very, very detailed nutritional recommendations because each one of them has to be able to, maintain a certain weight or increase their weight depending on where they're at. But also their body fat percentage, right? Like they're going to have those things tested. Every single thing you can think about is tested at the combine. And for the most part, they're at the hospital for a very long period of time at the combine, getting pretty much a lot of things MRI. So if they had an injury that was in the past that was documented, they're probably getting an MRI. It's a very grueling process by the time they actually get to the combine. So again, these are all things we're preparing the athletes' expectations for early on. and also just, getting to know them, right? Understanding what makes them tick, what they need from us, knowing that, they have certain things that have worked for them in the past, and we want to meet those expectations as well. So there's a lot of going back and forth with that, which is a very important part of that process on day one, week one. And then from there, each week we're basically, collaborating with the performance coaches. And the great part about that is we as a group decided we're going to make a stoplight system. Now, that is something we did as a group at Iowa Sports Therapy. We made a very unique, individualized stoplight system to be able to give data to the performance coaches every single week on what we recommended for weight room intensities, where they're at with certain, field drills, running drills, things like that. And I go into detail on this on our Insider Access page just to kind of go through the full system of that because I felt it was very, very helpful. And I know that as a group between performance and sports therapy, we really were able to dial in certain things because we had as much objectiveness into this process as possible. And therefore, it gave us some structure in a controlled chaos environment because, again, things are constantly changing, right? So, I'll give you two examples of things we did for two different types of combine athletes. One that would be, let's say, injured. We had one specific guy that was coming off a long-term rehab. And, for him, we needed to be as objective every week as possible to give those performance coaches as much info as possible so they knew when they could start to advance him and, give them what he can't do, what he can do, where we would expect him in a week, other contextual information such as, this particular individual is, he's going to be 4 weeks past this injury. This skills coach is going to be in that week. So he's going to be ramping up some skill work. So we're going to back off the rehab work. This is what we expect him to do with the skills coaches. This is what we've communicated. What's your input? Maybe do you want to back off certain things or maybe you want to ramp up certain things? All those things play a role. And there's a lot of contextual factors. And, these guys midway through had their Senior Bowl week, right? So a good chunk of them this year went to Senior Bowl. And unfortunately, the timing at Senior Bowl was just not good this year. It was a little later than last year. And Senior Bowl week is very stressful because what happens is they go from combine training for a couple weeks, which again, it's just not like your typical football training. You're preparing your body differently. And then you go into Senior Bowl week, which is competing against the best guys in college football, and coaches, scouts, all the above are there. And then you have a game at the end of the week. But the practices every day are just grueling. And and that's where there's a disconnect. And that's where guys start to feel these soft tissue injuries or something pops up. And, those are contextual factors that we have to be able to communicate with players, performance coaches, agents, our own staff as a therapy group. Because what happens is, they're going to come off Senior Bowl and a lot of them were banged up. So we had to readjust all of the performance training and combine training around getting those guys healthy and back to feeling fresh enough to do things, but also keeping in mind that we only got 3 weeks until the combine now. So there's some things that you have to kind of take into account from the beginning, the middle, and so on and so forth. Another example I can give you is a guy that might be healthy, right? So we had quite a few that were healthy coming in, but maybe they had a history of like tendinopathy in their knee. So in those cases, what we would do is, like I said, we would use a stoplight system. We'd make our performance coaches aware of that, but we would also do some preventative type work in the best way we could, right? Using test, retest, having frequent check-ins, frequent touches with that particular athlete that maybe had that, making sure it wasn't getting, reactive again. And if it was, trying to catch it early, being proactive about it instead of just reactive to it. And again, that takes a lot of time to be able to do that, to be able to catch up on things. So myself and my colleague would kind of split the group and make sure that we had our guys that we were kind of, more in charge of to be able to make it more doable, but then also come together as a group and say, okay, what's going on with this person? What's going on with that person? And then always make sure on a daily and weekly basis, we'd at least intermix the two groups. So we would really be as on as possible with every single person. So those are just a couple examples of kind of what we did. And lastly, we got to go to the combine at the end of this, which was the coolest part, right? So I sent my colleague Matt this year to go to the combine with 2 performance coaches. Leading up to it, they weren't going to allow anybody. They were going to have a bubble for it, which was, a huge issue for a lot of the agencies. And, they all threatened to pull their guys because there's a lot that goes into that final week of preparing the athletes for all those performance testings. So luckily at the last minute, they allowed one therapist or one, athletic trainer, massage therapist, plus a performance coach to be able to, go to the combine. So it was a little bit of a last minute schedule change. But again, like I alluded to earlier, it's constantly changing, right? And I think that people that are not adaptable or flexible don't really like that schedule and don't really feel like they can be successful with it. But for our group, we thrive in that situation. So we were able to go to the combine and, be able to really just prepare those guys on a daily basis, fine tune some last minute tune-ups with guys that were just, maybe coming off a rolled ankle or just, dealing with some soft tissue stuff leading up to it to make sure they're fresh, getting recovered every day because, they're there for a couple of days based on what group they're in. They're doing, medical testings for, like I said, long periods of time, interviews, and then they have their performance testing all in one day, which is extremely taxing on the nervous system. And, a lot of scheduling and thought process goes into, figuring out how do you, make sure that these guys stay as fresh as possible. So, those are the things that we got to do as a group. And I think that's also what made it very fun, stressful, again, invested, like I said earlier. But like I said, overall, very good experience. And the guys did unbelievable this year. So we're very, very, very fortunate. Now, is it profitable? All right. So again, we want to talk a little bit on this podcast about financials, how to make more money as a sports PT, things like that. There's a couple things I want to bring up with that. I think that there's a thought that it cannot be profitable, and there's a thought that it can be extremely profitable. And I think it depends on your model, right? Our particular model is well equipped for something like this because understanding what the expectations are for the sports agency, what they expect they will get out of this with what you have to offer as a proposal is really the most important thing. So, but also remember that in addition to just, let's say, what you negotiate with the particular sports agency, which for us was screenings, recovery, hours and things like that. Those are all guaranteed income, right? That has been negotiated up front. But guys also get injured in the the combine training. So that can be a secondary source of revenue. And not that you ever want that, but it's just realistically, that's what happens. And those things have to be taken care of. So there are options for things past just what's initially negotiated with that understanding ahead of time. So it can be very profitable from that perspective if you do it right and you have the right communication with everybody involved so that everyone knows what's going on. But also think of it this way. You're being exposed to future professional football players right off the bat. So you have the opportunity now to build lifetime value with that particular client, that particular athlete, right? That could be a potential customer next offseason, future off seasons, etc. If you do a really good job, right? You give them a great experience and you're able to, help them and really just get to know them and be invested in, more importantly, they're only used to what they get in college. So unfortunately, a lot of these guys have had horrible experiences in, their college athletic training rooms because there's so many guys, right? So, now they're having, attention to them. They're having, some really solid education because we're as a group very involved with that. And, again, now this can be a long-term profitable machine that you're getting early on just from one combine class. So yes, it can be absolutely profitable. Lastly, how do you be successful if you're working with the combine athletes, right? I think this is a really important thing because I've been there for 2 years now, and I think that each year has gotten better, but I think both years were successful. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. And I'd say one thing that will make you successful is communicating early and often. And what I mean by that is you have to communicate with the sports agents, the players, the performance coaches, your own therapy team, depending on who you have around you, any massage therapists you might be bringing in or that come in, any other practitioners that may be complementing that combine class. Everybody needs to be able to communicate often and really early on. And another example I can use with that is, let's say you have a guy that came in that maybe just rolled their ankle and it's 5 days before the NFL Combine. You better be on that immediately. Be able to communicate with the agents. Hey, this is what happened. This is where I think it's at. I think it's a grade 2. I think right off the bat, we're going to be able to tackle this every single day for the next couple of days. I'll know more information in 2 days, but right off the bat, I think agility work might be out. Can we move that to pro day? Hey, I think linear work is very possible. We'll work with the performance coaches. All these things need to be communicated early and often to every single person involved. The more you can do that, the better you're going to be and the more successful you're going to be. Now, that takes a lot more effort and time on your part, and that's going to mean early mornings, crazy amount of information during the day, and then late at night too. Things are constantly changing. You should be texting with your athletes. You should be communicating early and often. You should be communicating late at night as well, because that's your job. And I think that's what makes it successful if you can do those things. The other thing I think is tackle those problems early. And there's no pun intended with that one, but rolled ankles, like I said, if you catch that early enough, that can be something that you can fix earlier so they can do some things, right? Tendinopathies. If you start to have some flare-ups of guys that have an injury history of tendinopathies, you better catch it before it's reactive. You better start to attack that thing. And that's where talking with the performance coaches and the skills coaches to be able to say, hey, this is starting to become a little reactive. Let's just be a little bit aware of this from a volume perspective, and let's make some accommodations this week or this day so that we can see how it responds. And that's where, if you can be early on with these things and tackle those problems early, you're going to have a lot more chances for success. And then lastly, I think serve your athlete. Remember, you're there to, help them get to their dream basically and be as successful as possible. So if you're always thinking, how do I serve my athlete, which you should be thinking anyways as sports physical therapist, but especially with combine athletes, if you're there to serve them constantly, check in on them constantly, do as much for them as you possibly can. That meant a lot of times for myself and Matt, we did not eat lunch at times, right? Or we had to skip out on lunch or, really cut it short a lot of times. We had to come in on weekends. We had to do these things for this 8-week period because it meant that it gave them the best opportunity possible. And I think that me and Matt would both agree, we have no problem doing that because we can see the big picture and we're invested in these people. We get to know them, and for us, that helps us make it as successful as possible for them, which in turn automatically makes our group more successful. So that's basically what my experience at the, or with the 2022 NFL Combine class was like, what it was actually like, what we did as a group, if it was profitable, and then basically how we made it successful, because we did all those things as a group. And again, the biggest takeaway I can give you guys is that there's a lot of controlled chaos. There's a lot of changing of schedules, things on the fly, things that will happen that you have to adapt to. And, if you keep those principles in mind for how to be successful, those 3 principles, tackling problems early, serving the client, and over communicating early and often, those are the ways that you make these type of situations very, very successful, fun, and profitable. So, that's basically a wrap for this episode of the Business Minded Sports Physio podcast. If you guys like this, subscribe to our YouTube page, subscribe to the podcast, pass it on to friends, and give me some feedback. Let me know what you guys think about these podcasts. Let me know what topics you guys are interested in. In the future, I'm going to have some additional guests on to talk about some experiences, some profitable things. I'll be talking myself about how to work with sports agents. I know I alluded to that quite a bit today in this episode. How you can get paid to travel with athletes, which I think is a very cool and unique thing that more and more physios are doing now. How to work with high performance coaches, and then just so many more profitable strategies that I've experienced in my career that I want to share with you guys. So, if you guys like this, like I said, subscribe, ask questions, Let me know what you think. Until next time, see you next week.